Michael Harris had spent 30 years inside the same classroom. 30 years. He had watched thousands of students walk through his door. Some arrived with dreams, some arrived with problems, some arrived believing they would never become anything. But Michael believed in every single one of them. He wasn't the richest teacher, he didn't own a big house, he didn't drive an expensive car. He still carried the same old leather briefcase he bought when he started teaching. But inside that briefcase were hundreds of handwritten letters from former students, letters that reminded him why he never gave up. Every morning at 6:30, before the school halls became crowded, Michael unlocked his classroom. He cleaned the board, prepared his lessons, and placed one sentence above his desk: every child deserves someone who believes in them. For Michael, teaching was never just a job, it was a promise he made 30 years earlier when he was a young teacher. Met a student named Daniel. Daniel was 16 years old, angry, troubled, always getting into fights. Everyone at school had already decided his future. They called him a failure. But Michael saw something different. One afternoon, after Daniel got suspended, Michael stayed with him after school. "You are not your mistakes," Michael told him. "You are the person you choose to become." Those words changed Daniel's life. Years later, Daniel became a successful businessman, but Michael never knew that Daniel wasn't the only person whose life he had changed, because sometimes the people you help never forget you, even when the world does. 30 years after he started teaching, Michael walked into school expecting an ordinary day. He didn't know that by the end of the afternoon, his entire life would change, and the people who ignored him would finally discover the true value of the teacher they never appreciated. Michael Harris arrived at the school before sunrise. The parking lot was almost empty. The halls were silent for most people. An empty school felt cold, but for Michael, it felt like home. He walked slowly toward his classroom, the same classroom where he had spent 30 years, the same walls, the same old wooden desk, the same small scratches on the floor left by generations of students. He smiled. Every corner held a memory. On the wall were photographs, hundreds of students. Some became doctors, some became engineers. Some became teachers themselves. Some returned years later just to say, "Thank you, Mr. Harris." Michael placed his old leather briefcase on the desk. Inside were his lesson plans, his old books, and the letters from students who never forgot him. He opened one letter. The handwriting belonged to Daniel, Mr. Harris, you were the first person who believed I could become something. When everyone saw a problem child. You saw a future. Michael smiled. Those words meant more to him than any awards. Suddenly, the classroom door opened. A young man wearing an expensive suit entered. Michael looked up. "Good morning." Man didn't smile. "Are you Michael Harris?" Michael stood. "Yes, how can I help you?" The man looked around the classroom. "My name is Robert Collins. I'm the new school director." Michael extended his hand. "Welcome to Jefferson High." Robert shook his hand briefly. Then his eyes moved toward the old photographs on the wall. "You still keep these?" Michael smiled. "Of course. These students are the reason I became a teacher." Robert looked around the classroom, old books, old furniture, old teaching materials. Then he looked back at Michael. "The school is changing." Michael nodded. "Change can be good." Robert opened a folder. "But some things need to be replaced." Michael's smile slowly disappeared. "What things?" Robert placed several papers on the desk. "We need younger teachers, people who understand modern education." Michael looked at the papers. His heart sank. "You saying my teaching is outdated?" Robert avoided eye contact. "I'm saying the school needs a new image. 30 years, 3 decades of dedication, thousands of students helped, and suddenly, all Michael heard was one word: old." Robert picked up the folder. "We'll talk soon about your future here." Then he walked away. Michael remained alone in the classroom. He looked at the photographs on the wall, the faces of students who once needed him. He quietly whispered, "I guess even teachers can become forgotten." But he didn't know that one of those students from the photographs was about to return, and his return would change everything. Michael Harris stayed in his classroom long after everyone had left. The school had become quiet. The laughter of students disappeared. The footsteps in the hallway faded away. But Michael remained sitting at his old wooden desk. In front of him was the folder Robert Collins had left behind. He didn't want to open it because deep inside, he already knew what it meant. After 30 years of teaching, someone was finally telling him that he no longer belonged. Slowly, he opened the folder. Inside were documents about the school's future plans, new technology, new programs, new teachers, and at the bottom, a recommendation: replace older staff members to create a younger school image. Michael stared at those words. Older staff members, not experienced teachers, not dedicated educators, just older. He closed the folder. For a moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Doubt. Maybe Robert was right. Maybe the world had changed. Maybe students no longer needed teachers like him. Then, his classroom door opened. A young woman stood there. "Mr. Harris." Michael looked up. He smiled. Emily. She walked inside. Emily was one of his former students. She was now a successful doctor, but in Michael's eyes, she was still the shy teenager who once cried because she believed she would fail her exams. "I heard about the new director." Michael looked away. "It's nothing." Emily shook her head. "No, it's not nothing." She looked around the classroom. "You know what's funny?" Michael smiled slightly. "Became a doctor because of you." Michael laughed softly. "No, Emily. You became a doctor because you worked hard. She shook her head. When my parents divorced, I wanted to quit school. I thought my life was over. You stayed after class every day. You helped me believe I wasn't broken. Michael looked down. He remembered every student, every struggle, every moment. Emily took a deep breath. People like Robert Collins only see numbers. You saw people. Michael smiled sadly. Sometimes people forget. Emily looked at him. They won't. Then she walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned around. Mr. Harris, you should know something. Michael looked up. Thousands of us, students whose lives you changed. We haven't forgotten. After she left, Michael sat quietly for the first time that day. He felt a small spark of hope, but outside the classroom, someone had been listening. Robert Collins stood in the hallway, and he had heard every word. Robert Collins stood in the hallway for several seconds. He had heard every word. He watched as Emily walked away from Michael's classroom. For a moment, something changed in his expression. Maybe, just maybe, he had judged Michael too quickly. But then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. The school board president, Robert, answered. Serious voice spoke from the other side. Is the transition going? Robert looked through the classroom window. Michael was still sitting alone. It's going as planned. Need the old system gone. Robert stayed silent. The voice continued. Jefferson High needs a new reputation. Young teachers, modern image, more wealthy families. Robert looked back at Michael, then he said quietly, understood. The next morning, Michael arrived at school as usual, 6:30 a.m. same classroom, same coffee, same lesson plans, but something felt different. Students were whispering in the hallway. Teachers were looking at him with worried expressions. Michael walked into the staff room. The conversation suddenly stopped. He smiled politely. Good morning. Nobody answered immediately. Finally, his colleague Sarah walked toward him. Michael, he noticed the sadness in her eyes. What happened? She hesitated. Have you seen the announcement? Michael frowned. What announcement? Sarah handed him a printed paper. His hand slowly opened it. The headline made his heart stop. *** Jefferson High announces major staff changes *** below it. A list of positions being reviewed, and his name was there. Michael stared at the paper. 30 years, thousands of lessons, countless students reduced to one announcement. Position under evaluation. Sarah whispered, I'm sorry. Michael folded the paper. It's okay. But his voice didn't sound convincing. At lunch, Robert Collins entered the teacher's lounge. Everyone became quiet. Robert looked around. We are building a new future for this school. Need teachers who can adapt. His eyes moved toward Michael. Some people struggle with change. Michael looked at him. Is this about my age? The room became silent. Robert avoided the question. It's about moving forward. Michael nodded slowly. I understand. Then he picked up his coffee and walked away, but as he left, one student in the hallway heard everything, a boy named Lucas, a student everyone had already given up on. He watched Michael walk away, and he remembered something 2 years earlier, when nobody believed Lucas could graduate. Michael was the only teacher who stayed after school to help him. Lucas whispered, they can't do this to him. That afternoon, a student who had once needed saving made a decision. He was going to save the teacher who saved him. Lucas sat in the back of the classroom. He watched Michael Harris erase the board after the final lesson. The room was almost empty. Most teachers had already left, but Michael stayed. Just like he always did, Lucas remembered the first day he met him. 2 years earlier, he was the student everyone avoided, always angry, always late, always in trouble. Teachers called him lazy. Some said he would never graduate. Even his own family had stopped believing in him. But Michael Harris never gave up. One afternoon, Lucas was sitting alone outside the school. Michael walked past and stopped. Why aren't you going home? Lucas shrugged. Doesn't matter. Michael sat beside him. It matters to me. Lucas looked at him. Why? Michael smiled. Because you're my student. That simple sentence changed everything. No judgment, no anger, just someone who cared. From that day, Michael stayed after school every afternoon. He helped Lucas with homework. He listened to his problems. He reminded him that one mistake didn't decide his entire life, and slowly, Lucas changed. He graduated, he entered college, and he became the first person in his family to continue his education. But Lucas never forgot the teacher who believed in him. Now, standing in the hallway, he watched the same teacher being pushed aside. A teacher who had saved hundreds of students was being treated like he meant nothing. Lucas walked into Michael's classroom. Mr. Harris. Michael turned around. He smiled. Lucas, what are you doing here? Lucas looked at the papers on the desk. Is it true? Michael became quiet. What? That they're trying to remove you? Michael looked away. It's complicated. Lucas shook his head. No, it's wrong. Michael smiled sadly. Lucas, sometimes things change. You taught me something. Michael looked at him. When something is wrong, you don't just walk away. Michael stared at him for the first time in days. He felt proud, not because Lucas was defending him, but because Lucas had become the person Michael always believed he could be. Lucas took out his phone. Need to make one call. Michael laughed softly. To who? Lucas looked at the old photographs on the wall. To everyone. Michael frowned. What do you mean? Lucas smiled. To every student whose life you changed. Then he walked out. Michael didn't know that within 24 hours, the entire city would learn the truth about the teacher they tried to replace. Lucas left the school building that evening. He walked outside, stopped near the entrance, and looked back at the place where his life had changed for years. Michael Harris had been the person who stood up for students. Now, it was time for students to stand up for him. Lucas opened his phone. He had hundreds of contacts, former classmates, graduates, people who once sat inside Michael's classroom. He created one message, only one sentence. Mr. Harris needs us. Then he pressed send. At first, nothing happened. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Lucas wondered if anyone would remember. Maybe people were too busy. Maybe life had moved on then. His phone vibrated. One reply, then another, then another. A message. Wouldn't be where I am without him. Another, he saved my life when nobody else cared. Another, tell me where to go. Lucas looked at the screen. Thousands of memories, thousands of people, all connected by one teacher. The next morning, Michael arrived at school. He noticed something strange. The parking lot was full, not with students, with adults, doctors, engineers, business owners, teachers from other schools, people carrying flowers, people holding old photographs. Michael stopped walking. He didn't understand. A woman stepped forward. Mr. Harris. Michael looked at her. Yes, she smiled with tears in her eyes. You probably don't remember me. Michael looked closer, then his eyes widened. Emily, she laughed. You remembered. Michael smiled. Of course I remembered. More people began walking toward him, one by one, former students, decades of students, all coming back. A man in a suit stepped forward. Mr. Harris, you told me I wasn't a failure. That sentence changed my entire life. Another woman said, you helped me believe I could become a doctor. An older man held a small notebook. You stayed after school every day until I learned how to read. Michael looked around, his eyes filled with tears. He had spent years wondering if his work mattered now. He had his answer, but across the street, inside his office, Robert Collins watched everything through the window. His expression changed for the first time. He realized something. Michael Harris was not just an old teacher. It was the reason hundreds of people became who they were, and removing him might become the biggest mistake this school had ever made. The school entrance had never been this crowded. Michael Harris stood there quietly. Hundreds of people were looking at him, former students, parents, teachers, people whose lives he had touched. He didn't know what to say for 30 years. He walked into that school every morning believing he was doing something important, but he never expected anyone to remember. A young man stepped forward. He was wearing a doctor's coat. Mr. Harris. Michael smiled. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. Man laughed softly. That's because you had thousands of students. My name is Daniel Carter. Michael froze. Daniel, the 16-year-old boy everyone had given up on, the boy who used to sit alone in the back of the classroom, the boy who believed he had no future. You became a doctor. Michael whispered. Daniel nodded. Because you refused to let me quit. Crowd became silent. Daniel looked at everyone. When I was 16, everyone saw a problem. They saw my mistakes. They saw my anger. Mr. Harris saw something nobody else saw me. Michael looked down, trying to hide his emotions. Daniel continued. One day I told him I was worthless. Looked at me and said, a person is not defined by their worst day. Daniel smiled. I wrote that sentence on my bedroom wall. I read it every morning. Today. I wanted him to know. Changed my life. Crowd applauded. Michael wiped away a tear, but then something unexpected happened. More cars began arriving, not one, not two, dozens. People stepped out. Some were in business suits, some were wearing uniforms, some were carrying old school photographs. A woman walked toward Michael. Mr. Harris, you probably don't remember me either. Michael smiled. I'm sorry, she laughed through tears. My name is Sarah. I was the girl who couldn't read in 7th grade. Michael's eyes widened. Sarah, she nodded. You stayed with me every afternoon for a whole year. You told me I wasn't stupid. Today, I'm a professor. Crowd became emotional, one after another. They shared their stories. A lawyer, a firefighter, a nurse, an engineer, all saying the same thing. You believed in me. Never gave up. Changed my life. From inside the school building, Robert Collins watched everything. His phone suddenly rang. The school board president, he answered quietly. What's happening there? Robert looked outside at the hundreds of people standing around Michael. His voice became softer. I think, made a mistake. But the school board president replied coldly, don't forget the plan. Michael Harris still has to leave. Robert looked at Michael again, and for the first time, he wasn't seeing an old teacher. He was seeing a man who had built generations, a man they were about to lose. Robert Collins stood inside his office. He could still hear the voices outside, hundreds of people, all saying the same name, Michael Harris. For years, Robert believed success was about numbers, test scores, rankings, money, a school's reputation. But standing there, watching former students return for one teacher, he began to question everything. His phone rang again. The school board president, Robert, answered. We need to talk. Voice on the other side was impatient. Let emotions change your decision. Robert looked through the window. Michael was surrounded by people who loved him. He has been here for 30 years. Board president replied, and that's exactly the problem. Robert frowned. What do you mean? We need a new image. Parents want younger teachers. People like Michael belong to the past. Robert became silent. For the first time, those words sounded wrong. Meanwhile, Michael sat inside his classroom. The room was filled with former students. The same classroom that had felt empty yesterday was now full of memories. A man named James placed an old photograph on the desk. Do you remember this? Michael picked it up. It was a picture from 20 years ago, a group of students standing beside him. Michael smiled. Remember this day. James laughed. You remember everything. Michael looked at the photograph. That's my job. James shook his head. That's who you are. Room became quiet. A former student named Laura stepped forward. Mr. Harris, I tell you something. Michael nodded. When my father passed away, I wanted to quit school. I didn't think my life mattered. She took a deep breath. But you noticed. You came to my house. You talked to me. You told me I still had a future. Michael looked surprised. I did that. Laura smiled. You did that for many people. Room filled with emotion. Then a student walked in, a current student, Lucas. He looked at Michael. Mr. Harris, I think you need to see this. He handed him his phone. On the screen was a video. Thousands of people had shared stories about Michael. The title read, ***, the teacher who changed our lives, ***. Michael stared at the screen. His hands trembled. Never wanted attention. Lucas smiled. That's why people are giving it to you, at that moment. Robert Collins entered the classroom. Everyone became silent. Michael looked at him. Robert slowly walked forward for the first time. He didn't look like a director. He looked like a man who realized he had made a mistake. Mr. Harris, I owe you an apology. Room waited because everyone wanted to know. Would Michael accept it? The classroom became completely silent. Everyone looked at Robert Collins, the man who had walked into the school days earlier. The man who called Michael Harris outdated was now standing in front of him. Michael slowly stood up. An apology. Robert lowered his head. Yes, he looked around the classroom, at the photographs, at the letters, at the people whose lives Michael had changed. I thought I understood what made a good teacher. I was wrong. Nobody spoke. Robert continued. I saw your old classroom, your old books, your old methods. I thought they were signs that you were behind the times. He looked at Michael. But I never looked at the people you created. A quiet emotion filled the room. Robert took a deep breath. I judged you before I knew your story. Michael remained silent. Then he asked, why did you change your mind? Robert looked toward the window. Because yesterday, I saw hundreds of people come back for you. I realized something. What? Robert answered quietly. Buildings don't make a school. People do. The room became emotional. Michael looked down. For years, he had never asked for recognition. He never wanted awards. He never wanted his name on a wall. He only wanted his students to succeed. Then Robert handed him a document. Michael looked at it. What is this? Robert smiled. School board meeting decision. Michael opened it. His eyes widened. The document. Harris will remain a senior educator and advisor for the future of Jefferson High. ***. The room erupted with applause, but Michael didn't smile immediately. He looked at Robert. There is something I need to ask. Robert nodded. What? Michael pointed toward the document. Only me. Everyone became quiet. Michael continued. There are many teachers who work hard every day, teachers who feel invisible, teachers who wonder if anyone notices. Robert looked at him. Michael said softly, if this school wants to change, don't just save my position. Respect every teacher. Those words stayed in the room because everyone understood. And after being hurt, Michael wasn't fighting for himself, he was fighting for others. Robert slowly nodded. You're right. I thought this was about one teacher. He looked around, but it's about all of them. Outside the classroom, a reporter who had been covering the story recorded everything, and by the end of the day, the entire city would learn about the teacher who asked for nothing, except respect for others. The next morning, Michael Harris arrived at Jefferson High like he had done for 30 years. Same time, same hallway, same classroom, but something felt different for the first time in a long time. People stopped to say hello, students smiled, teachers greeted him, parents thanked him, not because he had become famous, not because his story was on the news, but because people finally saw what had always been there, a teacher who cared. Michael walked into his classroom. On his desk, there was a small box. He looked around. What's this? Lucas smiled. Open it. Michael slowly removed the lid. Inside were hundreds of handwritten letters. He looked confused. What are these? Emily, one of his former students, smiled. We collected them. Michael picked up the first letter. The handwriting was from a student he taught 15 years ago. Mr. Harris. You probably don't remember me. But I remember you. Michael smiled. And another. You stayed after school when nobody else would. Another. You told me I could become someone. Another. You believed in me before I believed in myself. Michael's eyes began to fill with tears. He looked at everyone. I had no idea. Lucas interrupted gently. That's the point. You never helped people because you wanted something back. You helped because that's who you are. Michael looked at the letters. 30 years of teaching. 30 years of giving, and now, all those memories had returned to him. Later that afternoon, Robert Collins stood in front of the school board. The room was filled with teachers, parents, students, and former graduates. He spoke into the microphone. I came here believing that success was about changing the old. I was wrong. He looked toward Michael. Sometimes the people we think are holding us back. The people who built everything we have. Room became silent. Robert continued. Michael Harris taught thousands of students. More importantly, taught all of us what it means to care. Crowd applauded. Michael sat quietly. He didn't enjoy the attention he never had, but he understood something now. A person's value is not measured by age, not by money, not by status. It's measured by the lives they touch. That evening, Michael returned to his classroom alone. The sun was setting through the window. He looked at the empty desks and smiled. Tomorrow, new students would walk through that door, new stories would begin, and Michael Harris, the teacher everyone almost forgot, would continue doing what he loved most, changing lives. Michael Harris thought everything had finally returned to normal, but he was wrong, because sometimes the hardest battles begin after people start clapping. A few weeks after the school board meeting, Michael noticed something strange. The number of students in his classroom had increased, not because they were forced to attend. Because they wanted to. Students from different grades started coming after school. They asked questions, they wanted advice, they wanted someone who would listen, just like students had done for 30 years. One afternoon, a quiet student named Noah stayed behind after class. Michael noticed him sitting alone. Everything okay? Noah looked down. Everyone thinks I'm not smart. Michael pulled a chair beside him. Who told you that? Everyone. Michael smiled gently. Then everyone is wrong. Noah looked surprised. You don't even know me. Michael opened his old notebook. No, enough. He pointed to a page. Every successful person has a moment when they doubt themselves. The difference is, they don't let that moment decide their future. Noah looked at him. Someone tell you that? Michael smiled. Someone did. Teacher. A moment. Michael remembered the past, the reason he became a teacher when he was a teenager. There was one teacher who believed in him. A person who saw potential when Michael saw failure. That teacher changed his life, and Michael spent 30 years trying to do the same for others. Meanwhile, outside the school, something was happening. The story of Michael Harris had spread far beyond the city. A video of his former students thanking him had reached millions of people online. Messages started arriving, from students he taught decades ago, from people who had never met him, from teachers around the world. One message caught everyone's attention. It was from a famous company founder. The name surprised everyone. Daniel Carter, the same student Michael had helped when he was 16. His message was simple: Mr. Harris, you taught me that success means nothing if you forget the people who helped you get there. Now it's my turn to help you. Michael read the message quietly. He smiled, then his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. A calm voice spoke. Mr. Harris. Yes. My name is Daniel Carter. Michael froze. After all these years, the student he once saved was calling him. I think it's time we talked about everything you did for me. Michael looked out the classroom window, and for the first time, he wondered what was waiting for him next. Michael Harris held the phone in his hand for a moment. He couldn't say anything. The voice on the other side belonged to a student he hadn't heard from in years. Daniel Carter, the boy everyone thought would fail. The boy Michael refused to give up on. Daniel. Michael's voice became emotional. Is that really you? Daniel laughed softly. Yes, Mr. Harris. You still sound the same. Michael smiled. And you sound like a very busy man. Daniel became quiet for a moment. Because of you, I became the man I am today. Michael shook his head. No, Daniel, you worked hard, Daniel replied, but you gave me the reason to try. The words stayed silent between them, then Daniel continued. I heard what happened at the school. Michael looked away. It's nothing serious. Daniel laughed gently. Mr. Harris, you spent your whole life telling students not to hide their problems. Don't start hiding yours now. Michael smiled. Some things never changed. Daniel still knew him. The next day, a black car arrived at Jefferson High. Students gathered around the entrance. A successful businessman stepped out, but Michael didn't see the expensive suit. He saw the 16-year-old boy who once sat alone outside the school. Daniel walked toward him for a few seconds. Neither of them spoke. Then Daniel hugged his old teacher. The entire school watched. A powerful businessman hugging the teacher who believed in him. Daniel pulled away. I wanted to thank you. Michael smiled. You don't owe me anything. Daniel looked around the school. That's where you're wrong. He pointed toward the building. Every person in this school owes you something. Michael laughed. That's impossible. Daniel shook his head. No, it's true. Then Daniel opened a folder. Inside were hundreds of pages. Michael looked confused. What is this? Daniel smiled. Every story, every student, every life you changed. Michael slowly opened the folder. The first page was a list of names: doctors, teachers, engineers, firefighters, people from all walks of life, all connected by one person, Michael Harris. Daniel whispered, you thought you were just teaching classes. You were building futures. Michael looked at the pages, his eyes filled with tears. For 30 years, he wondered if his work mattered now. He finally had the answer, but Daniel wasn't finished. He had one more surprise, and this time, it would change Michael's life forever. Daniel Carter looked at Michael Harris. For 30 years, Michael had given everything to his students, his time, his energy, his heart, but he had never expected anything in return. Daniel opened another folder. This is for you. Michael looked confused. Daniel, what is this? Daniel smiled. Something you should have received a long time ago. Michael slowly opened the folder. Inside were hundreds of signatures, not from random people, from former students. Each one had written a message. Because of Mr. Harris, I didn't give up. Of Mr. Harris, I found my purpose. Of Mr. Harris, I became someone. Michael touched the pages. His hands were shaking. I don't understand. Daniel looked at him. You spent 30 years telling students they mattered. We want you to know. You mattered too. Michael looked away. He tried to hide his tears, but he couldn't for years. He walked through empty hallways, carried his old briefcase, prepared lessons alone, never asking if anyone noticed, and now, the answer was standing in front of him. Thousands of people had noticed. Later that day, Daniel invited Michael to a special event. The school auditorium was filled. Michael thought it was a simple celebration, but when he entered, he stopped. The walls were covered with photographs, old class pictures, student memories, letters. 30 years of his life on the stage was one sentence, ***, the teacher who changed THUSANDS of lives. ***, Michael covered his mouth. He couldn't believe it. Robert Collins walked onto the stage. The same man who once wanted to replace him. He held a microphone. I need to say something. Room became silent. I judged Michael Harris because of what I saw. I saw an old classroom, old books, an old teaching style. He looked at Michael. But I failed to see the most important thing, what he built. Robert took a deep breath. I thought a school needed a new image. I was wrong. School needs people like Michael Harris. The crowd stood and applauded. Michael looked at the audience, at his students, at the people whose lives he touched, and he realized. The greatest reward for a teacher was never money. It was knowing that somewhere in the world, someone was better because you believed in them. The auditorium remained silent. Everyone was looking at Michael Harris, a man who had spent 30 years standing in front of a classroom. Was now standing in front of hundreds of people who wanted to thank him. Michael slowly walked onto the stage. He looked at the photographs, the letters, the faces of his former students for a moment. He didn't know what to say, then he picked up the microphone. I never expected this. Room became quiet. I became a teacher because one person believed in me when I was young. Michael looked down. I was just trying to do the same thing for others. Daniel smiled from the audience. Michael continued. Never remembered the names of my awards. Never counted the days I worked. I remember every student who walked through my door. A tear rolled down his face, because every student mattered. The audience stood quietly then. A woman in the front row raised her hand. It was Emily. Mr. Harris. Michael smiled. Yes, she stood up. Do you remember when I wanted to quit school? Michael nodded. You thought you weren't good enough. She smiled. You told me something I'll never forget. What did I tell you? Emily answered. Your future is bigger than your current situation. The room became emotional, one by one. Former students stood up, a firefighter, a nurse, a lawyer, a scientist. A business owner, all repeating the lessons Michael had given them, not lessons from textbooks, lessons about life. But while everyone celebrated, Michael noticed something. A young student sitting alone at the back of the auditorium. The boy looked sad. Michael walked away from the stage. He approached him. What's your name? The boy looked surprised. Jason. Michael sat beside him. Why aren't you celebrating? Jason looked down. Because people like me don't become successful. Michael smiled. He had heard those words before, 30 years ago, from Daniel, from Emily, from many others. Michael looked at him and said, do you know something? What? The students who need the most help. Usually the ones with the most potential. Jason looked at him. You really believe that? Michael smiled. I spent my whole life believing it. Boy smiled for the first time, and Michael realized something important. The reason he became a teacher was never to be remembered. It was to keep finding the next person who needed someone to believe in them. The next morning, Michael Harris arrived at Jefferson High as usual, 6:30 a.m. for the students, before the noise, before the world woke up. He unlocked his classroom door, but this time, something was different on the wall above his desk. There was a new frame. Michael walked closer. Inside was a simple sentence. Every life you touched became a part of your story. He smiled. He knew who put it there. His students. Michael sat down at his desk for the first time in years. He didn't feel invisible, but he also knew something important. Recognition was not the reason he became a teacher. Helping people was. Later that morning, a new student entered his classroom. Her name was Olivia. She sat in the back corner, quiet. Alone, she avoided eye contact with everyone. Michael noticed immediately after class. He walked toward her. Is everything okay? Olivia quickly answered. Yes. But Michael knew that answer. He had heard it thousands of times from students who were struggling. You know, when people say they're fine, sometimes it means they don't know how to ask for help. Olivia looked at him for a moment. She almost cried. My grades are terrible. I think I'm just not smart enough. Michael sat beside her. Who told you that? No one. Then why believe it? Olivia stayed silent. Michael opened his old notebook. Inside were names of students from the past. Students who once thought they couldn't succeed. I want to show you something. He pointed to one name. Daniel. Once believed he would fail. Another name. Emily. She thought she couldn't achieve her dreams. Another. Lucas. Everyone had given up on him. Michael looked at Olivia. But they all had one thing in common. What? They kept going. That evening, Michael received a message from Daniel. It contained a video. Thousands of former students had recorded messages for him, but one message was different. It was from a student Michael had never met, a student from another country. The student said, I watched your story online. I don't know you. Your kindness reminded me that good people still exist. Michael watched the video quietly, then he smiled because he finally understood. Months passed. And Michael Harris continued doing what he had always done. Teaching, helping, believing in people. The attention from the news slowly disappeared. The cameras were gone, the interview stopped, but Michael didn't change. He still arrived at 6:30 every morning, still prepared every lesson, still stayed after school for students who needed him, because for Michael, a person's value was not measured by how many people noticed them. It was measured by how many lives they changed. One afternoon, Michael received an invitation. It was from the university where many of his former students had studied. They wanted him to speak at their graduation ceremony. Michael almost refused. "I don't think I'm the right person." Daniel laughed when he heard, "Mr. Harris, you spent your whole life telling students they were capable. Someone is telling you the same thing." Michael smiled. "I just taught history." Daniel shook his head. "No, you taught people how to believe in themselves." Graduation day, Michael stood on a large stage. Thousands of students filled the seats, professors, families, guests, everyone was waiting. The host introduced him. "Today we welcome a man who spent 30 years changing lives. Teacher who proved that one person can make a difference." Michael walked onto the stage. The applause lasted longer than he expected. He looked at the crowd, then he began, "I want to tell you something. The world will often measure you by what you have. Your job, money. Your achievements, those things can disappear." Crowd listened. "What remains? How you treat people." Michael paused. "Never underestimate the power of one kind word. Person who believes in you. Moment when you choose to help instead of ignore." After the speech, a young graduate approached him. "Mr. Harris," Michael smiled. "Yes." The young man held out a letter. "I wrote this because of your story." Michael opened it. The first sentence made him stop. "I was ready to give up. But I remembered that somewhere there is a teacher who believes people can change." Michael looked up. The young man smiled. "You helped someone you never even met." Michael looked at the letter, and for the first time, he realized something. His greatest lessons were no longer only inside a classroom, they were traveling through people. From one generation to the next years passed. Michael Harris grew older, his hair became more gray, his steps became slower. But his passion never changed. Every morning, he still walked into the same classroom, the same room where thousands of students had discovered they were capable of more. One day, Michael received a letter. The envelope looked old. The handwriting was familiar. He opened it slowly. Inside was a letter from Daniel. "Dear Mr. Harris. I know you never wanted recognition. You always told us that the best reward is seeing people succeed. There is something you need to know." Michael continued reading. "The reason so many people became successful. Because one person refused to give up on them." Michael stopped. His eyes became wet. That afternoon, Michael walked through the school hallway. He looked at the photographs on the wall, hundreds of faces, hundreds of memories, but then, he noticed something new. A picture had been added. It was a picture of him. Underneath it were the words, the teacher who believed first. Michael stood there quietly for 30 years. He never wanted his name remembered. He only wanted his students to remember their own worth. Suddenly, a group of current students approached him. One student smiled. "Mr. Harris." "Yes, can we ask you something?" Michael smiled. "Of course." Student looked at the picture. "Why do people respect you so much?" Michael thought for a moment. Then he answered, "I don't think people respect me because I was special. They respect me because someone once believed in me. I decided to do the same for others." Students listened carefully. Michael continued, "Never forget, sometimes the person standing next to you only need one person to believe in them." Students smiled, and Michael walked back to his classroom because after all these years, his most important lesson was still the same: believe in people. Even when they don't believe in themselves. Michael Harris thought he had already seen every chapter of his life. 30 years of teaching, thousands of students, countless memories, but he never expected what happened next. One morning, Michael arrived at school and noticed something unusual. The hallway was decorated, photographs covered the walls, old newspaper articles, student letters, pictures from different years. At first, he thought there was some school event. Then he saw his name, Michael Harris Appreciation Day, he stopped walking. He couldn't believe it. Lucas walked toward him with a smile. Surprise. Michael looked around. "What is all this?" Lucas smiled. "It's everything you gave us." Michael shook his head. "I didn't do anything special." Everyone became quiet. Daniel stepped forward. "Mr. Harris, that's the one thing you always say. Never understood how special you were." Students from different generations began entering the hallway. Some were young, some had gray hair, some brought their own children, but they all came for the same reason: to thank one teacher. A woman walked toward Michael. She was holding an old notebook. "Do you remember this?" Michael looked at it. His eyes widened. "Your first assignment." She smiled. "You told me I had a voice worth sharing. I became a writer because of that sentence." Another person stepped forward. "I became a firefighter because you told me courage isn't about not being afraid." Another became a nurse because you taught me kindness matters. One after another, they shared their stories. Michael stood there quietly, listening, crying because he finally understood. A teacher's work is like planting seeds. You may not see every tree grow, but one day, you look around and realize the entire forest came from those small moments. At the end of the celebration, Daniel handed Michael one final gift, a small wooden box. Michael opened it. Inside was his old classroom key, the same key he used on his first day of teaching. Michael held it carefully. Daniel said, "You opened a classroom door 30 years ago. You opened something much bigger. You opened doors in people's lives." Michael looked at the key and smiled because after all these years, he finally understood he was never just a teacher. He was a person who helped others discover who they could become. Michael Harris sat alone in his classroom. The school was quiet. The students had gone home. The hallway lights were slowly turning off. For 30 years, this room had been his second home. He looked around: the old wooden desk, the chalkboard, the photographs on the wall. Every corner carried a memory. Michael opened his old leather briefcase one last time. Inside were the same things he carried every day: his lesson plans, his books, and the letters from his students. He smiled. So many years had passed, but those letters still felt new. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Michael arrived at school, but this time, the entire hallway was filled with students and teachers. Everyone was waiting. He looked confused. "What is happening?" Lucas stepped forward. "Mr. Harris, we wanted to give you something." Michael smiled. "You already gave me enough." Lucas shook his head. "No, you gave us enough. It's our turn." They led him to the classroom door. Above it was a new sign, ***, the Michael Harris Classroom of Hope, ***. Michael stopped, his eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve this." Daniel stepped forward. "That's exactly why you do. Never asked for anything. Never wanted fame. You only wanted us to succeed." Michael touched the sign for a moment. He remembered the young teacher he once was, a young man who entered the classroom with nothing but hope. He didn't have money, he didn't have power, he didn't have influence, but he had one belief: every person deserves someone who believes in them, and that belief changed thousands of lives. Later that day, Michael stood in front of a new group of students. A young student raised his hand. "Mr. Harris." "Yes." "Why did you become a teacher?" Michael smiled. He looked at the faces in front of him and answered, "Because one person believed in me when I needed it most. I wanted to become that person for someone else." Classroom became silent. Then the students smiled because they understood the greatest teachers are not remembered because of what they taught. They are remembered because of how they made people feel, and Michael Harris would never be forgotten. Michael Harris continued teaching for many more years. He never became the richest person. He never lived in a huge house. He never chased fame, but he had something far more valuable: a life full of people who remembered him. On his final day at Jefferson High, Michael walked through the empty hallway one last time. He touched the classroom door, the same door he opened every morning for decades. Inside, the room looked exactly the same: the desks, the books, the photographs, but one thing was different on the board. Someone had written a message: "Thank you for believing in us." Michael stood there quietly, his eyes filled with tears, because he finally understood a teacher's greatest achievement is not the awards on the wall, not the money in a bank account, not the titles people give you. It is the lives you changed. Before leaving, Michael placed his old leather briefcase on the desk. Inside it, he left one final note for the next teacher. It said, "Never forget, the student who needs your help the most may become the person who changes the world." Years later, new teachers walked through that same classroom. New students sat at those same desks, and every person who entered learned about Michael Harris. The teacher who saw potential when others saw failure. The teacher who listened when others ignored. The teacher who believed when nobody else did. At the end of his life, Michael never counted his success by money. He counted it by the thousands of people who became better because he was there. And that was enough, because some people leave behind houses, some leave behind wealth, but the greatest people leave behind hope. ***, the end. ***, a teacher's influence doesn't end when the school bell rings. Sometimes, a single kind word can travel farther than anyone ever imagines.